Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, and sometimes mangas. Also miss the middest and worst. You get the gist. We cover the whole spectrum.
Yeah, it's a good intro. It exists on its own.
And speaking of existing, I'm your host, the soon-to-be known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my thunderous co-host, it's Jamie.
Thunderous. We can go with Thunderous. That has brought my energy level up.
You can tell I was busy today, and I did not quite scratch beyond the surface of, like, what are descriptions to do with Thor? And it was either this or thoughtful, but spelt Thor at the beginning.
Oh, that would have been good.
Yeah, but that would have been like thoughtful.
Can we ADR that in?
Just that, how I did it just then. But then Thunderous is like, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
I
Like,
do have a voice that booms.
you have been described as the young Brian Blessed.
I have. That is very true. I think we may have even talked about it on this very podcast.
I mean, it's bound to have come up at some point.
Yeah.
Also helps that you look like a young Brian Blessed as well.
I don't know.
If you had blacker, curlier hair, I reckon so.
So it's interesting. I do look like a young Brian Blessed, as in I look like a potentially younger version of the current Brian Blessed that we have. What I don't look like is Brian Blessed when he was actually young.
Yeah, I see what you mean now.
He was a very striking man with a very strong jaw.
He had very contrasting features, which is something I've only learned about recently while trying to dress myself like an adult and finding out what colors work and stuff.
Ah, I see.
But the fact that he had such dark hair and light skin, it made, like, you look at him and he's just so eye-catching because of the contrasting features.
And then he had quite a round face, but also a very angular jaw and nose. Like, he was a very interesting looking bloke when he was younger.
He was also smiling a lot of the time, which I've been told is apparently a good way to be affable towards people. I don't know.
Have you heard, Ryan?
I've heard of it as a concept. I don't think I'll be taking on myself just yet. It's like an alien learning to, like, hide amongst humans.
It is a bit, isn't it? But it's okay. We're educating you gradually.
I mean, I like to stick with my comic books. And speaking of comic books,
we're talking about one today.
We're talking about the Immortal Thor, which is an interesting one because it's one of the few that we've touched on briefly before and are now doing a more fuller reading of.
Yeah, we talked about an issue of it, didn't we?
Yeah, the issue came out and we did the Immortal Hulk to tie in because they're both by Ewing. So thought, you know what, enough issues have come out. Let's circle back. Let's put a pin in this and we'll circle back later. And now we've circled back.
Yeah.
Just like a wheel of sorts, which is maybe a little bit of a spoiler.
Oh, it's going to be one of those episodes, isn't it?
I mean, I'm sensing it's going to be one where I'm more excited about the text than you are.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty low energy today as it is.
And so Thor and his escapades, they weren't enough to lift you out of
No,
said
unfortunately,
funk?
no.
Fair enough. Well, we'll get into exact reasons why that is. Maybe we'll, like we do with text that we have issues with, maybe we'll have ways to improve it.
Potentially, I think so, yeah.
I think more thunder would have been
more thunder would have been good.
More, yea, verily, strike at the Shakespearean language.
Yes, although there is plenty of that, isn't there? Should we start with the artings?
I'll give the preamble of who it's by. I did mention Al Ewing earlier. I wouldn't say he's a favorite of mine yet because I've only really enjoyed properly the Immortal Hulk, but that one was a high one on my list.
We both liked that, didn't we?
Yes,
I remember liking it.
I liked the dark. I mean, one thing I noticed in this is, without getting spoilers straight away, there was a similar point in this as in Immortal Hulk, where you complained about, like, you were doing so well, and then you just started bringing in all these other characters. And it was like the exact same point in this one. I was like, I think Jamie's not going to like that as well.
Character.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Well, it wasn't quite, I mean, we'll get into it. There's an interesting point that I would like to touch back on later.
I was going to.
Well, good thing. Good thing in your invisible notes that you've made a note of that.
Absolutely.
So this one, as said, written by Al Ewing, looks like art by Martin Coccolo, and there is another name that's not on here, but it is on the cover, Matthew Wilson, who I'm not sure if that was colors or lettering, but he did something for it. The one thing I want to credit as well is the cover art by Alex Ross. Now, that is a Marvel staple these days.
Yeah, the covers were good.
Alex Ross is this guy who, apparently, I found this out recently, apparently cover art pays a lot more than normal art.
Well, that makes sense.
Well, I don't know, because, I mean, on the one hand, the quality of the work is more important, you would think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, it's got to be the eye-catching for people to actually pick up and buy it, or, to open it and read it online or whatever.
I don't know if it's as important now as it used to be in the age of digital purchases.
I think even then, they'd still like, because their cover is the main part you see first, in the same way of like a physical comic book shop. So what I'm getting at is, yeah, it's got to be more eye-catching, but it's significantly less work than doing art for a whole entire series, isn't
Because if you think about it, it's the same as music. 50 years ago, less than 50 years ago, like 30, 35 years ago, album covers were desperately important because they were 12 inches across and you were flicking through a stack of them and you only really heard new music on the radio or if your friends already had the album. And so people literally bought albums based on the covers, right?
Yeah.
And it would have been the same in comic book stores, whereby you were flicking through a stack of new comics and picking them out largely based on the artwork, right? They'd have been bagged and, comic book stores don't necessarily like you spending too long reading the product before you buy it.
No, fair enough, exactly.
Whereas now, when you're scrolling through, the websites to download and buy these things as digital purchases, really you're just looking at thumbnails, aren't you? The same way you do on Spotify. Well, and so the cover art is more a placeholder and less of a feature.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still got to have that attractive, like, look at this, like, look what we're doing here.
Yeah, totally.
And what's interesting is, Alex Ross specifically I've got an interesting kind of relationship and view of his, because on the one hand, he does so many comic book covers. Like,
is that his thing?
Yeah, he's known for it. So the main full comic title that he did all the art for, he's done a bunch, but the one he's most well known for is a story, a DC story called Kingdom Come.
Okay,
and it's this art style, so exactly as you see on the cover art, but throughout the entire book. So it looks very polished and very smooth, detailed, but also a weird kind of roughness behind the scenes as well. I'm terrible at describing art, as you can tell.
Yes,
but that style, as you see in the cover, as you saw with these covers, it was for the entire book. Since then, he's really only done cover arts, but he does he seems to be almost exclusively hired to Marvel recently.
Okay,
so he does a lot of Marvel ones. So the weird thing I am with him is because he does so many, it kind of feels like, well, they don't feel as special now.
Because he's done so many.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Back when Kingdom Come came out, it was like a kind of like, look at this art style. Like, it was very different to everything else that has happened before or since.
I mean, isn't that just what the big two do, though? They homogenize things.
Well, in weird way. So this is a different way, because you're right in homogenizing for the main comic books. But then he's obviously taken I'm just going to do cover art for now, because maybe it pays more and it's less work. Like, very smart of him if those are true.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then it's like a lot of covers look very similar because they're all his work. But the opposing opinion I have is every cover I see of his, I think that looks great. I mean, so I can't really complain, In
general, in this kind of publishing, certainly in magazine publishing, doing the cover is the most sought after job. And so I know some graphic designers and some people who do cover art for published magazines.
Yeah.
And when they talk about it, they don't talk about how many issues of a certain magazine they have done. They talk about how many covers they've done.
Yeah.
And the kind of general theme is that they will move on from doing the artwork inside a magazine and laying a magazine out and just become the cover artist. And so it kind of makes sense that there would be artists in the comic book world who'd also be running that same grift.
I mean,
so to speak.
There's the main one is Alex Ross.
Yeah.
Like, he is the most common cover artist you see these days, especially for Marvel. And his art style is so specific, especially amongst comic book fans. As soon as you see an Alex Ross, you know immediately that it's him.
You know who it is, yeah.
Exactly. So, again, on the one hand, it's great art. I think on the other hand, I see it a lot. So I thought it was worth noting at least. And he did all the incredible, the Immortal Hulk ones as well. What worked especially for Immortal Hulk was how dark the theme of those comics were. So for his style, which I'm going to attempt to describe for anyone who hasn't seen it. If you haven't seen it, if you're listening, look up Alex Ross. You'll see it immediately. You'll see what I mean. It's kind of like a proper painted piece of work, but I think because of the technological advances, he does it, probably almost certainly digitally, but he does it with like the detail of modern technology. So it still has the texture and vibrance of like paint almost. So, like proper old school, historical paintings.
Yeah.
But with the color and detailing of modern digitalness.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the
does what I said make
cover,
sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, just looking at the first cover, the sense of light that he's gotten on the front of Thor's body would have been a real technical challenge in paint. I mean, it's kind of made to look like watercolor.
Exactly, yeah.
But again, he's using a really, really well-worn color idea here, which is blue and orange.
Yeah.
So look at a really great example of blue and orange being used to massive effect in cinema is the Transformer films.
The modern ones or the old cartoons?
The modern ones, the ones with Shia LaBeouf in them.
Yeah.
They're all blue and orange. If you look at them, everything is blue toned or orange toned. And so you can see here the way the armor's playing off against the skin. That's like a real classic contrasting colors, blue and orange pop together. I mean, there is this whole genre of art now, which is digital painting. And these are very good digital paintings.
Yeah, and I would say, I think based on the time of when his stuff became popular, he was maybe speculation say, but maybe a bit of a comic pioneer within comics specifically of this type of art style.
I mean, they are quite painterly, aren't they?
Yeah, but what's interesting is no one else is doing them, and I think that might be because one person has kind of capitalized and become known for it. So if anyone else does it, it's just like, oh, you're doing Alex Ross. Especially in comics.
And I will admit, he has a very good sense of anatomy. So I'm just looking now at the cover for issue 3, and Thor is very well posed here.
Yeah, and again, like a historical painting.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you know, like a sort of Renaissance painting almost.
Yes, that was the word I was missing.
And, you know, Thor's very well posed here, and like that lat spread... I mean, it's a very impressive lat spread. For somebody who doesn't know what a lat spread is, Google it. Because I'm not going into that much detail here. But, you know, the anatomy's quite strong there. And yeah, they're very painterly, aren't they? And they're very vibrant.
Yes. And before we proper starting with the arting, I'll give a little bit of a blurb because I think it would be unfair of you to ask you to describe the story for this one.
Oh, mate, I could barely follow the fucking story.
Exactly. So... from my perspective, as someone who's read a bit of Thor already, the Thor story, as we're covering the first 6 issues of this Immortal Thor series that started late last year and has run over into this year, so it counts for the end awards.
Hey.
The stories are quite a by the numbers Thor story.
Yeah.
He is the ward of the 9 realms in some way, mainly Midgard and Asgard, but you know the rest as well. He is the All-Father now, so he has taken the role of Odin.
Yeah.
So he is occupying that role now, which he has for a while now, and it is a kind of by the number story of there's a problem and he's got sorted because he's the Odin son, but he's the All-Father now, and it's kind of related to his past. So
yes.
Without going into the details, which we will get to in the story, but that is the general gist of it. I think to give any more of the story would just be giving away basically the plot of the first
Well, there's
5
not
issues.
A whole lot of plot, is there really?
No. I do like some of the subplot stuff, which I think this series will get into. And I am going to be following this series after we're done here. So maybe I can come back and be like, hey, it's gotten better or it's gotten worse. You know, we'll see. But story-wise, there is a big threat that Thor has to deal with.
Yeah, a big existential threat.
Yeah. And I'll say up top as well, as a general gist of it, I enjoy the comic, but I am definitely comparing it to the Immortal Hulk. And the problem is the Immortal Hulk, by Al Ewing, also was such a reinvention of the character at the time. Like, the Immortal Hulk basically took the character from, like, here's another Marvel run for Hulk, and he's a bit sad because he's a monster and everyone hates him, but he's getting control of it, and oh no, someone's after him for the Hulk DNA or something. Yeah. Al Ewing took that and went into, what if the Hulk was an undead devil type, like evil genius character?
Yeah, he really played with some of the existing character tropes there, and he really got under the hood of it, didn't he?
Exactly.
Which I don't think he's really done here.
No, and that is my thing, is I am comparing it to that, and this, I don't feel like he's really doing anything that hasn't been done before with the Thor character. And for me as a previous reader, that is the case. And I think even for you, this is the Thor comic book character, even if you've not read any Thor. Am I right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Like, this is kind of exactly what I expected from a Thor comic. As a side note, very quickly, Al Ewing,
yes.
We talked about him a bit last time, but I can't really remember what the answers to my questions were.
Okay.
Is he British or American?
He's British.
So he's a British guy, lives in America, right?
Don't know where he lives.
Okay. But he's British.
Yes.
That's interesting.
He has a bit at the end of the first issue where he talks about reading comics as a young kid in England.
Okay, cool.
And he says, oh, like every kid of my generation, we all read comics. And I read that. I was like, were comics that popular? But then I kind of worked out his age. I was like, maybe he was a kid in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I guess in that time, comics were really popular then. I mean, around that time, you're leading up to like Death of Superman and, that like big kind of stuff. And Watchmen was like mid 80s. So yeah, you definitely had some big stuff going on comics wise. So it makes sense that it was a far more popular industry than maybe it is now.
Yeah, and TV wasn't as good in the UK back then.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's worth noting for our American listeners that you had satellite TV a lot earlier than we did. And so unless you as a person in the certainly in the 90s in the UK, unless you were willing to invest in TV, you got 4 terrestrial channels in the UK.
And a scrambled 5.
And a scrambled 5 that didn't really work. I think Channel 5 came out in the early 90s, didn't it?
I think so, yeah.
If you go back to the 80s, you had 3 channels. Like Channel 4 didn't even exist anymore. So there'd be 2 BBC channels and 1 local channel. And satellite TV was not really attainable for like, people on a very average income until the late 90s, early noughties in the UK.
Yeah.
And so there would have been more of a reliance on print entertainment in the UK in the 80s than there would have been in America, because satellite TV was huge over there at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or cable. Everyone had cable, right? And so it really does stand to reason that a young person in the 1980s would be consuming quite a lot of comics.
Yeah. And as true today as it was back then, the markup on comics has always been like a great profit driver.
Yes.
Like for the cost that it takes to make it, you only have to sell like X amount to cover the initial cost, and then you're looking at profit. And also I imagine they were one of the easier things to like transport across the ocean to get across to other countries. And
also Britain was shit poor in the 80s. I mean, the 80s in America was boom time, Wall Street. There was a lot of money floating about in America in the 80s, whereas in Britain...
we had Thatcher.
Yeah, it was Thatcherism, it was poverty, it was punks, it was mods, it was the specials. Like, it was a very different time, wasn't it?
And for anyone who doesn't know, for Americans especially, Thatcher is basically our Reagan. Like...
I mean, they got on.
every negative aspect of modern life can be traced back to one politician.
However, I think Reagan's dead now, isn't he?
Yes.
When Reagan died, a song... When Thatcher died, a song by the title of Bang Bang, The Witch is Dead charted #1. Like...
oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, Thatcher fucked Britain. So it kind of makes sense. This is a massive tangent. It's such a worthless tangent.
Where else would a tangent on a podcast happen?
Yeah, it's just like
this one.
Jamie rambling about the 1980s.
And capitalism.
And Thatcher.
And Thatcherism.
I don't think this is the first time Thatcher's come up, though.
And it won't be the last, I would be willing to place money on.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as we start talking about a comic book that's set in the UK in the 1980s... I will probably start talking about Thatcher at length.
Yeah, I mean, if we could think of a comic book artist who maybe also has a gripe against conservative politicians, maybe we just do an Alan Moore comic. that'll cover it.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to find out Alan Moore's a secret Tory.
That'd be weird. You can't believe you're a wizard and a Tory at the same time.
Boris Johnson.
He's not a wizard. He's a bloody gremlin, if anything.
I think he would be, in D&D terms, he'd be a hobgoblin.
Yes,
which
exactly.
is like the greater goblin.
Yeah.
Like the big goblin who's like the boss of the dungeon.
And stutters a lot as well. But then you realise the stutter is actually fake and they're actually like very Machiavellian evil. Like,
oh, he's so erudite.
Yes.
He's so erudite. Secretly, he's so articulate.
So... back to the comic, because it feels like there's a point where you can just feel, it's not a science, it's an art, where you feel you're far enough away in the tangent from the original subject. You go, this feels like we should turn back.
We're
now.
never going to get back to it naturally.
Yes.
If you let Jamie moan about Boris Johnson for any longer, it will just be an episode about Boris Johnson.
Exactly. So thus the phrase, back to the comic. And also thus the phrase, starting with the arting.
Starting with the arting. The art's fine. It's very much Marvel house style, isn't it?
So I kind of have a range... it's kind of a 2-point range of opinion, which is in some parts when it's just characters talking to each other, I would describe the art as mid, in the sense that it was fine. It serviced the story. I could tell who was who, and it looked interesting enough that I was following the story. It ranged from mid to great in parts, and specifically for me, the parts with a character who would become to known as, God knows if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Tyrannos?
Yeah, we'll go Tyrannos.
Tyrannos, I think. But the bits with him, so what I've discovered kind of looking between these points, what I literally would describe as going mid to great and not much in between, is in the mid parts is just, as I said, standard drawing, but you could tell it's like a pencil drawn, or at least a pencil effect, with some good lighting and shading, which would make some parts look a little nicer. But then you get these big panels and almost splash pages with Tyrannos in the night sky with the lightning jetting down and his like shadowy kind of figure, giant shadow. He's like a Galactus basically.
He consistently looks fantastic.
Exactly. So when judging the art, I was looking at these 2 points going like, I have to call it great and mid. Like it is both those things in very separate points.
Yeah, and admittedly there is a strong sense of anatomy here.
I think for Thor and his bulging arms, you kind of had to, didn't you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I suppose on some level, Thor is easy to draw because he is just two spheres and a triangle.
I mean, if you do it simply enough, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, totally. I mean, looking at him here, for instance, he is just two spheres and a triangle.
Yes, and that's a flashback panel. So is that right? Is that back when... with like old Loki?
No, that is current Thor.
Okay, so
no, he looks great.
So the only reason I say that is it does look like, and I think we did point this out when we did the first issue. It looks like Al Ewing has intentionally kind of gone back to a more traditional Thor look.
As a side note, I thought the flashback in issue 5 was some of the best artwork in the entire comic book.
Yes, and I think that was for a specific contextual reason.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Which we will get into in a bit.
I'm now combing back through issue 5, and I actually want to say that the flashback is in issue 6. But whenever that flashback happened, I thought it was really well integrated. And we talked about a comic recently that did this same thing, didn't we?
Wolverine and Predator. It had the different time periods and different art styles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't as much of a fan of it there as I am here. But I think, there's some of these panels in particular where you've got Thor and Loki together, and it just looks fantastic.
Yeah, the facials all look really great, I think, in every panel.
Yeah, and I don't really associate Thor with being a particularly expressive character. Not in the face. You associate him with this sort of stoicism and this strength, and you kind of think, well, he's going to go between a quite determined look and a snarl, really. Yeah. But the faces are so well drawn here that they're pulling their weight.
I did find one of the most common facial expressions, mainly on Thor, was a kind of somber look, and I think that is speculation, not being an artist. That seems to me like one of the most difficult expressions to draw because, it's not a smiley face, it's not a frowny face, like it's just something in between. So the artist definitely nailed like complex emotions, I think, in this. And I feel kind of bad calling the small, quieter parts mid. Because again, like for me, it was just getting the story flowing, and that's serviceable enough. But when I did remember to really look at the facial expressions, I did kind of go, yeah, this is actually good. Like, I'm going to go good to great in the kind of art.
Yeah,
generally.
no, I mean, again, I've just scrolled through it in a really, really condensed way while we're talking about it, and I've not noticed anything janky, firstly. There's no jank here. Everything's really clean. Lines are all pulled clean, faces look good, anatomy looks good. I mean, the artwork's pulling its weight. I don't necessarily like the way that some of the artwork's laid out. It made it really difficult for me to read.
There were parts, I think, where there was like a 2-page spread, and there was a big one on the left, but then you had a little one under it, then all the ones on the right.
Bothered me most is they had a straight thirds thing going on, but then on the left-hand side of the very middle panel, they would break that down into 4 panels, and then on the right-hand side of the middle third, it would just be that sixth of the page. And I found that didn't scan particularly well.
Right.
I didn't like that layout. Again, that's potentially because I was reading a digital version of this, and so I was reading it on a relatively small screen. I imagine if I actually had a physical copy in front of me, that would have played out much nicer.
Well, you're getting into a larger discussion there about, digital scanning, but like what should it be designed with in mind?
Yeah, what
like,
should it be optimized for?
Yes.
And I think this is inherently a print medium, and it should always be optimized for people enjoying it in print. because those are ultimately they're your most invested customers.
Yeah, but I think I've got a whole spiel about how I think that might be changing in the future. But yeah, we'll get into that in another day.
Absolutely, but no, the art. I mean, whilst I didn't like some of the layouts, and I wasn't a big fan of all the layouts, I don't. I think this could have been laid out more economically. The artwork itself was pretty good throughout.
Yeah,
and I agree with you. Some of those panels of Theranos looked fucking phenomenal. There's one in particular of him in profile where you're just seeing his face in profile, and I like the artwork was flawless. It was fantastic.
Yeah, he always looked very imposing, threatening. I feel like maybe in the context story, they could have worked to make him a bit more imposing, as a threat. Because like the most we get story wise is kind of like Thor used all of his all-father power and it didn't work. And
yeah, I mean that whole thing wasn't particularly well explained.
Yeah, I just didn't really feel like I didn't feel like he's exhausted all options and now he's done for. Like I never got that sense of dread.
There was a limited sense of threat. I think, and to get into the story, I think that's my overriding issue with the story, is that there was a limited sense of threat throughout.
Yeah, and there's definitely if you contextually break it down, there is threats and there is like time constraints and things like that. Specifically, there is a plot point with what's called the All Sleep, I think it's called. Yeah. And there's this idea that so Thor, being Odinson, he has the All-Father power. And that was given to him by Odin. He uses it all trying to defeat this Tyrannus when he first sees him, and it just doesn't do anything. So he manages to send Tyrannus away using a portal from Mjolnir, which I've not known to be a major thing, but maybe it was. But at least,
it is here, isn't it?
Yeah, it did at least get across. It got across in a very upfront, written way of, I've banished him to the edge of the universe. He is going to be back very quickly. I need to prepare for him coming back, kind of thing. But it didn't make me feel like that was a big worry.
Well, it made him feel like less of a threat. The fact that Thor could just, we've established here that Thor has these new powers. These new powers haven't worked. Using these new powers drains him. But even then, he can just send this guy away and buy himself time. And you're like, well, there's no threat anymore. Because there's never you've taken away any sense of immediacy, because when he comes back, you're just going to send him away again, aren't you?
Yeah, that was unfortunately, I think, the unintended result of how they plotted it out.
And then the mid phase here was very much a Loki story where Loki gives him a riddle. I don't fully understand what the resolution to the riddle actually was.
Yeah.
So Loki banishes him to an alien planet and says, you need to use what's in your helmet, which implied to me that he was saying to Thor, you need to actually use your brain here, bud.
Yeah.
Which again is very Loki and Thor.
Yes.
That's very much the dynamic that they have in all of the Marvel stuff that features both of them, right? And then he just turned his helmet into a fucking axe. And that seemed to be what Loki was asking him to do.
I made a note that I need Loki to have a great reason to put Thor through all this.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just kind of meandering story it has to be a good reason for them to do all this stuff. I did appreciate in the end. So the answer kind of was Thor kind of gathering the Loki was talking about. So making the offer of, I'll let you out, but you make me you give me the King of Asgard role kind of thing. Like I've exhausted your desperation. You're still stuck here and you need to get out because there's this threat to Midgard and you love Midgard. And then Thor kind of working out, this isn't real because Loki doesn't care about the throne because they've just established earlier that Loki had just given up the Jotunheim throne.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that in the sense of like, he worked out and Loki, the lesson was like, see, it's not about power. It wasn't about the weapon that you forged.
Yeah.
You couldn't fight your way out of this. You worked out that it wasn't real and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It could have been better.
Felt a bit flaccid.
Yeah. It definitely could have been better. I did at least appreciate there as well. There was this, what should have been executed better was Thor needed to enter this all sleep to repower for the return of Tyrannus. And there was a little bit in the dialogue. There was a little bit of like, I'm going to fall asleep soon and I need you to kind of help. I think it could have been paced in a way that emphasized that desperation.
And also so much of what was happening in the story came by way of exposition, by way of those little yellow panels. So this is an exposition-heavy comic.
Yes.
There's a lot of... There's a strong narrator here, lots of exposition, and a lot of those revelations happen exponentially as exposition, don't they?
One of my issues was they do 2 versions of that. They do the
Did you clog that as
the
well?
little box narration, and they do the inner thoughts of Thor. I wish they'd just done the inner thoughts of Thor.
And I think the story wouldn't have made. I almost get a sense here that they tried that and the story didn't make a whole lot of sense, and so they added the exposition in afterwards.
But you could tell they only add in certain parts.
Yeah. Where the story didn't make sense.
There's other parts that Thor's heavy inner monologue.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether... I've said before, I like comics that don't do that. I get a better sense of the story when it's not being kind of over-explained.
Yeah.
This was literally thought bubbles. This isn't just this in parts. It wasn't just a box in the corner. It was Thor's thought bubbles and what he's actually thinking.
And I think Thor is a really he's a suboptimal character to give us that level of insight into, because Thor's whole characterization is that he's a bit thick. Thor isn't a particularly intelligent character, certainly not in the Marvel universe, where we've got people like Peter Parker and Tony Stark who are deeply intelligent people.
So this Thor, I would say at this point in his life, is definitely much wiser
He's
than
more
the
thoughtful.
stereotypical. Yeah,
Hey,
part of he's more
it.
thoughtful. I'll give you a pun counter thing. He's definitely wise. He's definitely more thoughtful, and that is through experience. And part of like his core story, like his origin almost, is becoming worthy. Which we'll play into the story a bit later as well. But yeah, he's definitely grown, even though he's a being that's like centuries, thousands of years old, at least. He's grown in the past couple hundred. Like, yeah,
and having access to Odin's wisdom, because there's a heavy implication that he's gained a lot of Odin's thought processes here. He has a lot of Odin's wisdom, and obviously Odin drank. I mean, I don't know how much of the actual Norse canon comes into the Marvel canon.
So this one, I think all that stuff is like Odin's past.
Yeah.
As much as I've read Thor comics, he's just more been of kind of a overbearing, distant, stern but fair, maybe not that fair father type.
Like a capricious god.
Yes.
Yeah. And Odin's always a bit of a capricious fellow. And so, yeah, I think there's an implication here that Thor probably is a little smarter here, because, he's operating with some of that all-father good butter.
Yeah.
But even then, I don't really want to see the inner processes of Thor's mind. I want to see him hit stuff with his hammer.
True.
And I feel as though this is like a core issue with the text for me, is that I want to see Thor in fun adventure stories. And Thor's pretty static throughout this. Like, he is in a place and then he gets zapped to another place and then stuff happens and people show up. A lot of people show up, Brian. Yep. A lot of people. And he
does invite them. That's the difference. It's not, I'm here now and I will help you out of the mess. He's like, you got my invite then.
So can we go on? So I think we've kind of talked about the core outline of the story here leading up to this final set piece.
Yeah, I think from this point onwards, I would say, we're halfway through the episode almost, or just over. I would say my recommendation for this, before we get to that, is if you really like Thor stuff, this is worth a try. I think in response to what you've said, I think a lot of previous Thor texts have been Thor goes on an adventure and smashes something. So I think this is like the natural progression of a character who has consistently existed in comic runs since at least like the 60s.
Yeah, totally. It's hard because for me personally, because I'm really well versed in the Prose Edda and like the original Norse stories, there is a whole episode on this earlier in the podcast.
Yeah.
Any of the richness they've tried to introduce just comes off as seeming a bit silly to me. But also there's not enough richness there. Do you know what I mean?
Is it like a McDonald's version of Norse mythology?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, it kind of is, because...
fast mythology.
Yeah, it's like fast food. It's like, it's all flavour, no substance.
Yes.
And I kind of would want a bit more... I don't know. It just doesn't really land for me.
Yeah, I was hoping for a lot darker Thor, which I think I did say in the when we did the first issue only, because we'd just done Immortal Hulk as well. So I was like, I was hoping for a bit of a darker, like dark gods and abyss and evil and dealing with that kind of stuff.
Particularly as you have within the source material that they're working from here, you have Sif, who is
she's taken over the Heimdall role.
Yeah. Well, somebody's taken over the Heimdall role. I don't think it's Sif.
Yeah, it's Sif in this.
Oh, is it Sif?
Yeah. It's not addressed because it's been that way for a bit now.
So Sif would have historically have been. So she's Loki's daughter, and she's half abomination, half human. So she's half skeleton, half human, like split left and right.
Yeah, she's none of that in this.
And she is in charge of Niflheim, the underworld.
Right.
Oh no, sorry. Sif is.
Are you referring to Hela?
Yeah, I'm thinking of Hel. Sif is Thor's wife.
Right.
Wait a minute. Why is Sif Heimdall now? Why is Thor's wife Heimdall?
So she's not Thor's wife in this.
Right.
I think there may be like they had a thing a long time ago. Like they might have been together or something. Heimdall, for some reason, I think he got killed in a big story or something.
Right,
so one of the
he's
resolutions was like, we need someone else to look after. Because you also noticed at the beginning, the Rainbow Bridge was shattered, and Loki was like, "I'll bloody put it back together." And Thor's like, "How?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. I got a staff, but it's not actually the staff." But yeah, there's a whole thing kind of resolving what previously happened.
Right. Okay.
But part of that as a package, Sif is Heimdall's role.
But so we have Hel, who is the goddess of the underworld, and we have Jormungand and Fenrir. We have all of these great, really dark characters in the mythology they could be playing with. I also really like the idea that potentially Odin's kind of jam in the Prose Edda. One of the things that's explained to him in one of the more poetic passages.
You're asking the wrong person.
Is that he will go and test mortals, and he'll go and challenge mortals, and he'll test them, and he'll spend a lot of time in Midgard hidden as an old man, kind of challenging and testing mortals. And I would have loved to have seen Thor take on some of that role in a comic book.
So I think in this, that's like how they would mess around back in the day kind of thing. There's a great version of that in the Thor MCU film where they're talking about going to Midgard. Oh no, they're talking about I think they're going to like kill frost giants in Jotunheim.
Yeah.
And at one point, one of them's like, I'll tell you what, let's just pop down to Midgard, do a bit of banging, a bit of thunder in the sky, or whatever, scare the locals, have a beer with them, whatever. Like, let's just do that. And they're talking about like they did that last week, but in the film, it said that was like hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
But to them, it was just like, let's go have a bit of fun, we'll have a drink, accidentally tell them all about the 9 realms and everything.
Yeah.
And then come back and they're like, oh, what are those Vikings up to? Oh shit, it's all modern now. So that's kind of how they view it. It's same in the comics, like that stuff they did before, like back in the day. And it's meant to try and tie in like where those myths and stories came from. It's like, we kind of did stuff like that back in the day.
Because there's a pretty pervasive myth that one of Thor's sons survives Ragnarok and ends up being the first king of Sweden.
Really? Well.
Yeah. So there's a mythological, how there's like certain dynasties that are partly mythological in history.
Royal family.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certain royal courts that were like, we're not really sure this existed. King Arthur being a great example. The first Chinese dynasty, we think that is mythological. We think that that's actually fictional. And then, the first king of Sweden is said to have been Thor's son.
Well, if he can't make thunder or lightning, then, it's probably bollocks to me, is all I'm saying. I have a pretty high bar of like, we'll do some magic then. If he could do like some David Blaine type, like, I made a little electricity in my hands, I assume that's a trick of some kind. If he could just light a bit of, was it fire paper or something, I'd be like, you're probably right then, actually.
I really like the idea, because it kind of posits the idea that we are living in a post-Ragnarok society where the magic has all just gone. And the magic used to be there. And I kind of love that idea. I mean, it's the same thing that Tolkien was trying to achieve, isn't it?
I was going to say, is it like when Snoop Dogg thought that Game of Thrones was like actual history? That's why there's no dragons anymore, Snoop.
I've heard this, and it was like from a podcast that he did, wasn't it? But you've got to remember, that man smoked a lot of ganja.
Yeah. But then if you're doing it all the time, you'd think you just get like acclimatized to like knowledge, real world knowledge or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the verisimilitude.
None of us can really comment on what it's like to experience life as Snoop Dogg.
No, I imagine it's a wild ride.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I had so many issues with the story.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So the bit we're about to get to, like spoilers from here on in, is the fact that he assembles, as stated on the front of the following issue, the Thor Corps.
Yeah. So
great name.
So there's one other thing that's kind of happening around this time, which is, I'm going to call him Corporate Ganon.
Okay.
You know, Ganon from Zelda.
Vaguely.
Like, well, he's more like Big Pig Man in an office holding Thor comics.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's not really explained yet. I'm imagining that's going to become a pretty core part of the story.
So I would assume so. And what's interesting is that's actually a carryover from the Immortal Hulk. So within that kind of series. So
yeah, okay.
The character, he is a cutthroat psychopath CEO of the Roxxon corporation.
Yeah.
Roxxon is basically Exxon Mobil. They are oil drillers, essentially, but they also have all these like wings and arms and fingers and pies into like other planets and realms and stuff. They actually have, at one point, they engineered behind the scenes the War of the Realms, which was basically like World War One, but with realms.
So if I was a more engaged Marvel reader, I would know what was going on here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you read the right stuff.
Yeah,
but they've engineered this war so they could get into other realms and mine it for its like natural resources and stuff like that. So I really enjoy the character because of the real world implications.
Yeah,
he himself is also, because at one point he transformed and now he seems to be like it all the time, a Minotaur type character. The idea being that like the head of a corporation is like the Minotaur at the center of the labyrinth kind of thing.
I mean, that makes sense.
Exactly.
It's a very good metaphor, isn't it?
Yes. So he's basically evil. He was doing a lot of stuff to get at the Hulk during the Immortal Hulk run. And now I think Al Ewing is just kind of carrying him over in this because...
Right.
And he had a lot of stuff to do with the War of the Realms, even pre-Al Ewing. So
that stuff's happening, and then we get the mass Deus Ex character event.
Yeah, so that my one pushback on that is it does seem Thor went out and sought these people. He had a plan for beating. He used his head like Loki taught him. And he had a plan, and he assembled people for a specific reason. Do you remember what the reason was?
No.
He assembled people who could wield Mjolnir.
Right, yeah.
And specifically not just wield Mjolnir, but also to actually temporarily get the powers of Thor.
Yeah.
So his idea being that to fight... again, that wasn't even his main plan. That was like a cover plan to cover the real plan.
Which was to give him the hammer.
Yes. But again, using his smarts.
Yeah, but it all just felt very contrived. And it's nice to see Jane Foster. And Lizard Thor was fun. I don't know who Lizard Thor is.
His name is Beta Ray Bill.
Yeah, so what's going on with Beta Ray Bill, Ryan?
He's
Give me some context.
He's like a part of a race of aliens who basically look like weird horsemen kind of thing.
Oh, I thought he was a lizard.
No, he's more of like a horse type face. Well, he's an alien. Essentially, alien is the best way to describe it, but he has a kind of horse-shaped face.
Yeah.
And he, through some story or what, like decades ago, probably now, became Thor for a bit, and then he actually wielded like a second Mjolnir after the original one went back to Thor. He got his own Mjolnir called Stormbreaker,
which is the basis for the axe in the movies, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he became a Thor alongside Thor, and they've always kind of been like friends. So Thor is obviously the original Thor. Beta Ray Bill is a great example of how any being, if they're worthy, can inhabit the powers of Thor.
Yeah.
So he hasn't become Thor the character, but he has become Thor in powers and get up. And
also the fact that when they get the hammer, they look a bit Thor-y. Their costume changes. I think that's fun.
Yes.
And they should have done that when Cap caught the hammer. And they should have made like a hybrid Captain America Thor costume.
I think there would have been too many questions, because that does inherently bring up a lot of questions of like, why does anyone become Thor? Like, why does wielding a thing give you the costume? Because I think they break it down in a much more simpler, easier to digest way in the MCU, which is, if you wield this, you get the powers of Thor.
Yeah.
So, and Cap does, like, he wielded and he's a bit of lightning and stuff as well. But I think it's not meant to be like anyone becomes Thor. It's like, Thor, you need to be worthy to pick this up again and use it.
As a side note, remember there's that scene in one of the Avengers MCU films where they're all stood around a table and they're drinking together after like a fight, and they all have a pop at picking up the hammer.
Yep.
And Cap gets it to move a little bit.
Yeah.
And obviously at the time, no one really clocked it. But the implication is that he realized he could pick it up, but didn't want everyone to know.
So it's up in the air because I think it purposely left ambiguous. I love the scene especially because he's going for it and you can see him prepping and Thor is just like ha ha ha, and then it moves like a millimeter and Thor's face immediately goes, oh god, I've made a huge mistake. And then when he doesn't move it, Thor goes, whew, and he's like, I wasn't even worried. Oh, it's fine.
And then he picks it up and flips it, doesn't he? And like there's some fun moments in that scene where Tony Stark has like the arm on.
Yeah.
And like him and the other guy who have the other suit are both trying to pick it up and they can't, and it's all really fun.
And they've got the thrusters going the other way.
Like, yeah, I just thought that was really amusing. But yeah, I mean, they basically play fucking, what do you call it? You know when you do a running race, a baton. They basically do baton pass. Yeah, it's like a baton pass with the hammer.
And to be fair, I found that as an existing reader fan, I found that as a fun. It was a fun recontextualization, which is a word I had primed and ready to go.
Absolutely, yeah. You've not cut out us workshopping that word together.
I'd never cut out anything. It was a fun re-examining of the whole other people becoming Thor. But yeah, what I liked about that is, again, he had to get the people who he knew could wield it. So people who had wielded it in the past. I think Loki was the most interesting one.
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't know Loki could wield it.
Well, you would expect he wouldn't be able to, wouldn't you? And then the person from Mars.
Yeah, Storm.
Is that X-Men Storm?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So what I found especially interesting here, and I didn't know this was coming, this is like a proper sidestep into Hickman X-Men. So in this same universe, the X-Men have colonized Mars. They've
that all makes sense now.
And they've renamed it Arico.
Yeah.
And the idea, there's a whole kind of political tension in the X-Men of like the rest of Earth being like, why do you get to colonize the planet? And X-Men are literally like, because we did. Like,
yeah, because we can get there.
In exactly the same way that the Americans planted the flag on the moon.
Yes.
It's like, we got there, we made it livable, it's ours now.
Yeah, totally.
And all the like, or like the Earth governments being like, I don't like that. And they're just like, well, if you want to get there and colonize it, go ahead. Oh wait, your technology's not up to scratch, so
you can't make it.
I guess our portals are the only way we can get there. Oh, what? Only mutants can use our portals? Well, that's a tough side effect, isn't it?
No, I think that's cool. And now that I know that that's what's going on here, because I was kind of reading it and I was like, I think that's Storm.
Yeah,
but I'm so not sure, and I'm very confident that Storm isn't Martian.
I mean, she's the queen of Mars. Well, she's not the queen. She's on like the.
There's no queens. There's no queens there. Yeah. And that's why when she was summoned by a king, she had to come.
She was pretty pissed off about it.
Yeah.
I did worry there was going to be a bit of a... So there's a name... I got this term from the Weekly Planet podcast, for anyone who wants to listen to a podcast that might objectively be better than ours. I don't know.
Oh, don't, honey. You wound me.
But the phrase they use in this style with like Batman v Superman is they punch a bit and then they're mates. And that is what happened here. But I was worried it was just going to be a miscommunication, a bit of fight, and then they resolve it like, let me speak for a minute, or that kind of thing. This, I felt like it was a bit more justified, where Storm was like, you just kidnapped me. I'm pissed at you for doing that.
She was pissed, and then she didn't really get on board until she actually saw the existential threat, and she was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, exactly.
I see why you needed me. And it kind of makes sense because there's synergy between their powers.
Yeah, and Thor explicitly was like, not doing anything back.
Yeah.
He was just taking it.
And he said, the lightning doesn't want to hurt me and it doesn't want to hurt you. So don't make it choose. Let's just be chill. And it kind of made sense. He reasoned it out well enough with that. I liked her inclusion.
Yeah.
But again, it's this thing that happens in comic books now where, more often than not, the resolution to the thing is just forming an ensemble. It always makes me think of that Rick and Morty episode with the heist.
Yeah.
Where it's
Son of a bitch, I'm in.
Yeah. Like, a good chunk of the kind of last third, like the final act of this run, if you will, was him making an ensemble cast to fight the bad guy.
So the problem I kind of noticed is, and this is just looking at two of Al's texts. We're on first name basis now.
Yeah, of course.
For two of Al Ewing's texts this is the second time that in the third issue of a run, he starts bringing in other Marvel characters.
Yeah.
And the defense I will give of it is, and there was a common thing with the MCU where whenever there was once they did Avengers, they had a couple of solo films after it, Avengers characters in solo films between that and the next Avengers film. There was a common, not necessarily complaint, but like a comment was, why don't they just call the rest of the Avengers? So I think when you do stuff like this, and it does seem to me that Al Ewing is very aware of this, when you are in this universe of other heroes and you are facing an issue, why don't you call other superheroes? So on the one hand, I feel like it's a necessary trope when you are using these kind of characters in this universe. On the other hand, it's the second time he's brought them in the third issue. Like, it's weird that he does it twice.
It's no. If you had a pan for every time he did it.
Yeah, I'd have two.
You'd only have 2 pans, but it's weird it happened twice.
And for anyone who doesn't know, who didn't listen to the episode, in Immortal Hulk, the third issue of that, the Avengers kind of gather to deal with the Hulk.
You could say they assemble.
They in ways they assemble, yes. They assemble because the Hulk is doing stuff and they need to sort it out. But again, weird it happened in the third issue.
And I really like seeing I do like seeing other characters, but I like when it's really thoughtful. It's like when Doctor Strange turns up in a Spider-Man story. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. We like a bit of Doctor Strange.
They both live in New York.
Yeah, they both live in New York. They kind of know each other. They're both really smart. It makes sense that they'd kind of get on. And their dynamic's always fun. It's the same as with Tom... What's his name?
Holland?
Yeah, Tom Holland's Spider-Man and his relationship with Tony Stark.
Yes.
Like, I thought that brought a lot of richness to both characters, and you saw real growth in both characters because of it, and it was really worthy. But sometimes just forming an ensemble is just the way that they fix a problem now, and I just think it's a bit lackluster.
But again, if you existed in this universe,
you would.
You would, yeah.
You totally would.
I did appreciate that at least in this, there was a reason. There was a plan.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, oh, we Avengers heard you were having an issue, Thor. Do you want us to help? And he's like, yeah, all right then. Like, not going to turn down.
Well, as you're here,
yeah. If you can give us a quick hand with this,
yeah, give us a leg up on it.
I do appreciate that the plan was, and we're in spoilers, so we could explain it.
We're firmly in spoiler territory.
So the point is, Thor seeks out and invites 4 people who can also wield Mjolnir and thus the powers of Thor. Because Thor, because he's got the Odin power, can do the thing with Mjolnir where he says, he who is worthy, she who is worthy, then it's, these people are worthy. I've deemed them worthy. Probably why Loki could die. I think the main thing was he needed people with experience.
Yeah.
Because imagine if you'd never been Thor, and then you're like,
you were suddenly Thor.
Quick, pass me the hammer, and you go, oh, I've never had this before. Like, he needed people who were just like quickly could get on board.
Yeah.
And the plan is but the 4 of them, because Thor's just got his Odin power anyway, they pass the hammer between them 60 seconds each. Being Thor. So when they get it, they've got 60 seconds, they pass it to another, and they're all using the Thor powers of lightning and thunder, and they're all kind of tag teaming essentially this ancient god.
I don't think the action sequence was really there though.
No, it focused
very static.
It focused more on the passing between.
Yeah.
I think that was a fault of, I guess, the panel layout. Like, they didn't plan for like a big multi-person fight with a god, which maybe is a difficult thing to ask.
It's a difficult thing to ask, but it's obviously what this needs.
Yes, if you're going to set up this premise, then you kind of need to deliver on.
There's an obvious need for it,
yeah.
isn't there?
But then, so the plan is, that's the plan to cover the real plan.
Yeah.
And the real plan being, at one point, Loki's like, I'm going to bloody launch this straight into his face. And someone's like, no, Loki, don't do that, no. And then he does it, and the god catches the hammer, and he's like, what are you going to do now, you bloody gnats? He calls them gnats. And Thor goes, well, actually, now that you've got it, I deem you worthy. And then the big god becomes a big Thor with the big shoulder things and the cape and everything, which is a fun little moment. Bit weird juxtaposition with how dark the god was beforehand. And he goes, oh, you've just given me your new power with my old power, and I'm even more powerful.
Well, no, because actually you've realised that friendship is magic.
It's a little bit of that.
That's essentially what happens. He's like, well, now you have empathy.
It does at least call back to the power of Thor.
Yeah.
And I thought you'd appreciate the callback to why did those Vikings call on Thor when they were in the middle of a storm?
Yes.
And it was to stop the storm, and the real power of Thor is containing the power for the better of everyone else kind of thing.
Not how it worked in the mythology.
No, this is a very kind of this is based on the Thor being the god of storms and not the farming god.
Well, so he's always been a storm god, but obviously in an agricultural society, you pray to a storm god when there's no rain. And so typically you would make a big offering of alcohol to Thor if there was no rain or there was rain that you wanted to keep coming.
Right. But if there was too much rain, would you also go to Thor?
Very rarely too much rain. In an early agricultural society...
They weren't in England then.
In an early agricultural society, you don't get too much rain.
Right.
You like rain. Do you know what I mean? Like, rain is good. Rain is universally considered a good thing.
Yeah, but when it's been raining for like a solid week and you're like, come on, let up, we want to play football. Like, something like that. Whatever their version of that was in that time.
Axe fighting.
Axe fighting, yeah. Can't do, it's too much mud, it's too slippy.
I don't actually know what early Scandinavian recreational sports would have looked like. I imagine it would have been a lot of archery.
It was probably some kind of animal's intestines blown up to a ball, and then it was just football or basketball or whatever.
That's a singularly British thing. And
that we do today.
Yeah, but the version of football we played was closer to Aussie rules football or Gaelic football. Modern football, in the form it exists, didn't really exist until the Victorian era.
And in Scotland, that was the haggis that they did that with before they ate the haggis.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's just been Burns night. That's very on topic.
And for any Scottish people listening, don't correct us.
I discovered an amazing Robert Burns poem the other day.
Okay.
It's really good.
Would you like to read it out?
Yes, I would.
I'll put this as one of the topics, is we read a Robert Burns poem.
You might have to cut it out.
Okay.
Because it is pretty raunchy.
I mean, we are pretty raunchy as a podcast as well, so let's see how it bears out.
Yeah, okay, 1 minute. I'm just finding it. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So the poem is called Nae Hair On't. Yestreen I wed a lady fair, and ye would believe me, on her cunt there grows nae hair. That's the thing that grieves me. It vexed me, sir, it plagued me, sir, it put me in a passion, to think that I had wed a wife whose cunt was out of fashion.
So it's kind of like a limerick.
I mean, yeah, it's in our pentameter. I just love the fact that of all the things Robert Burns decided to write a poem about, it was his love of a hairy vagina.
It's not quite The Man from Nantucket. But it's still good. It was still good.
There you go.
It's not quite a wedding vow.
I mean, it's about a wedding vow. You know. I mean, it sounds as though it led to an annulment from what I can glean from it.
I tell you what, the first one that gets married has to read that as like the groom's speech at the wedding.
God, I don't know which of us is more likely to do that.
I mean, we're both going to put it off now that we've established that.
We're never getting married, Ryan.
Sorry, I lost a bet and now I have to say this. Jamie needs me to.
Well, this is the thing. Yeah, is it the first one who gets married has to have the other one read it at their wedding?
Yeah, sure, that'll do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have a warning, like get the kids out or put earmuffs on them or something.
Yeah, put earmuffs on grandma.
Yes. She'll be like, I remember that. And you're like, no. If ever there was a more pertinent back to the comic, it's right now.
Yes.
Some smaller points that I think were just fun, that we can go back and forth. A bit of a lightning round, if you will.
Okay, let's do that.
Maybe that.
A lightning round.
I didn't even mean for that.
A lightning round.
For this
God
one,
of Thunder.
only ever when we talk about Thor.
Yeah.
Lightning rounds. Or maybe it'll be a thing in the future. Who knows?
Well, if we do an X-Men comic and Storm's in it, we can do a lightning round.
Yes, we definitely will need to do some X-Men at some point. They'll be coming to the MCU at some point soon.
And the next time we do a Star Wars comic, if Palpatine's in it, we can have a lightning round then.
Infinite power!
Infinite power!
So, quick points. I liked the Tyrannus villain. I just thought the design was like cool in a way. I liked he had his wheel.
Yeah.
And he loved playing with his wheel. He looked, at one point there's like a bunch of old gods and they were all fighting and it's just him smashing people with his wheel. It's like, he bloody loves his wheel. Wheel of Fate, I think it was the point of it. I liked Thor's introduction for this one was commanding the storm in a stern, I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed way. I thought that was fun. Especially when the ice giants are like, oh, bloody hell, it's sunny now, and we're ice giants. Like, we've literally run away.
Doesn't go very well for us.
Yeah. But I do like how sternly he talked to the storm, like a disappointed dad. Loki, non-binary in this.
Yes.
And I genuinely think that's the main reason. Not only is it like just good representation, but of all characters to do this for, Loki is the character who has been male, female, a child, female again.
There is a huge precedent for it in the original
Exactly.
texts.
Yeah, and it's one of the cool aspects they've carried over.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of the things that they probably couldn't have done in the 60s. But now they can.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, yeah.
Like, it's one of the things that a modern reader would not find jarring. They'd go, oh, that's pretty cool. That's very representative of the society we live in.
Yeah. What I find interesting is, I don't know if this was ever done explicitly in the comics or not, like whether there was like an official coming out or turning point or anything like that. But in my headcanon, it either went Loki came out as non-binary, or the more fun version, to me, I think, is that Loki kept switching between male and female so often that everyone else just went, we're just calling you they now. Like, you changed so much, like, we are just going to use they for our own convenience now. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? Neither of those things are bad.
Exactly. Because unfortunately, some people don't realize they is the non-specified way to talk about a person whose gender you don't know.
Yeah, totally. And we should all be using it more.
Whereas,
we should all be using the they-them pronouns as often as we want.
Whereas that guy who got pissed off about Starfield went, fucking pronouns! And
I think I read a thing on Reddit, which is where I read all the things I read that aren't in books. And it was an American mum who had called in the school getting really angry that they were teaching their child about pronouns. And they were it was English class. Like, they were teaching them how pronouns worked.
Yeah.
And it was like, you can't teach my kids about pronouns. And you're like, do you realise that pronouns have become a buzzword for something that you don't like, that we should all be really cool with, but they're a feature of our language that has existed for as long as our language has existed.
Yeah. It could be summed up. I think you enjoyed this reference. It was someone on the American evangelical right or whatever who basically said, as a tweet or something, said, there are no pronouns in the Bible. And everyone was like,
yes, there are.
Honey, you don't know what you're talking about. Like,
oh, sweetie, you don't know what a pronoun is.
You just outed yourself.
But this is the thing. Pronouns have become a buzzword now, and they are just a simple feature of our language.
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
In the same way that a lot of people complain about woke without being able to actually define it.
Right, totally.
And if you ask them to define it, they really struggle to get across the point without sounding like I'm a massive arsehole to people. Like,
I don't know if my life has just changed and I'm socializing less at the moment, and so I'm encountering activists less often. But I feel like the conversation about trans people and trans rights has quietened down a little bit in recent months.
We are in England. It's very different in America. So that's like a very important point.
I would hope that it's changing. Like, the conversation has gotten a bit quieter in England because it doesn't need to be as loud anymore, and things have just gotten better. And it's not a case of like, things are still awful, we've just all forgotten to talk about it. You know?
Well, the thing is, even our Tories, which are right political party, don't talk about it, if at all. Like, I very rarely hear them.
You only get the odd backbencher making noise about it at this point.
Whereas in America, it's like front and center main political.
We still don't have a lot of like, I mean, because bathrooms have always been the big thing. I don't really understand that either. You know, I don't really understand people's fixation on which bathroom somebody else uses. But I don't see a lot of gender neutral bathrooms outside of like really queer spaces in the UK, and I think that's something that could do with changing.
There's quite a lot of them in London, but obviously London is, it's a different beast, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I suppose. I mean, it's nice that, that because once something changes in the capital, it changes in the rest of the country. Yeah. Realistically, like, London sets the trend for the rest of the country, doesn't it?
I mean, let's hope that's not the case for bloody property prices, am I right?
Am I right?
Yeah. Anyway, back to the comic, and I think we've covered pretty much anything, unless there's any other little points or what have you want to make.
No, where would you put this?
I would put this... It's a difficult one. It's a high, mid, low base, and it's really hard to determine which it is. For me, I think I would have to go low based because I did generally enjoy it, but I know I enjoyed it for a lot of the other references or references to other things.
I'm going to say it was pretty mid, unfortunately.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
It's in Midgard.
Yes, ironically enough, yes.
Ironically, this Thor comic languishes in Midgard. Yeah, it's pretty mid.
But that's fair, and I think we're fair enough to differ on this because we got different things out of it. And again, I had more references.
I didn't dislike it at all.
I also liked how disgusting the Minotaur character was. In the Hulk one, he was just like a proper Minotaur. In this, he's like a rotting skull of a Minotaur, basically.
They did a good character design.
Maybe he's got more disgusting as he's got more capitalistic.
I mean, the character designs throughout were pretty solid.
Mm.
Really good character design throughout the whole comic, wasn't there?
I think it looked better than it read.
Yeah, totally. Like, you know, any individual panel taken in isolation looked pretty fucking good.
Yes. Which, unfortunately, is a shame for me because I was looking forward to the writing of it. But, you know, we'll see what Al Ewing does next.
Again, you know, much as last week where we talked about the first, 9 issues of that manga and it hadn't really gotten warm yet, it might have just not warmed up yet.
Well, but the problem is, so these first 5 issues were quite clearly a first volume.
Yeah.
I did we did read a bit of issue 6, or we read issue 6, and that felt like the beginning of the next volume.
Yeah, totally.
The thing with that is I did like how that was going into old Thor comics.
I hope that keeps happening.
Yeah, and there's starting to become a plot point about copyright of the Thor story or something with, what was his name? I can't remember the character's name. He was played by someone in the Marvel films. Hang on. So they introduced Scourge the Executioner.
Yeah.
And him meeting with the Minotaur character, and you think, what's going on here? Like, is this going to just be some evil scheme? And it essentially is, but it comes into, again, the copyright ownership of the Thor mythos on Earth, basically. Yeah. So immediately that's interesting because I'm like, that's so different from anything Thor related normally. So I'm looking forward to see where that goes.
And it's so interesting because it's almost Disney referencing themselves. Because now that Disney have a Thor property, I imagine they would be really keen to stop anybody else doing a modernized version of any kind of Thor story. And it's that classic Disney thing of taking ownership over stuff that long should have been in the public sphere.
But this is them saying themselves as the bad guys.
Yeah, totally. This is very self-referential from Marvel and Disney.
Yeah, what I think is it's generally a case of Disney not knowing what's happening and probably not really caring as well. They'll be like, oh my god, the comic book readers think Disney's evil now. I don't think they are worried about that in the slightest. Probably because they are aware how evil people think they are already.
And I'm so excited for all that Mickey Mouse porn.
Yes. Steamboat Willie specifically.
Yeah,
and he's already got the name.
Yeah, I'm so excited for Mickey Mouse to be in the public domain. That's so good.
Yeah. Specifically Steamboat Willie version, which is it's a distinction that needs to be made, unfortunately, because there's already a Steamboat Willie horror film, I think, coming out or something, which is probably going to be god-awful.
Yeah, but I'm going to watch it anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to keep reading this. I will report back and I'll let you know if it gets better or worse.
Yeah, I'd be really intrigued to see how this one warms up.
If another Thor thing happens, then we can maybe come back to this and see how it's gone and stuff.
I mean, this is one that I'd be happy to do a second volume of in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
You know?
We'll put it in the calendar.
We'll whack it in the calendar.
Speaking of the calendar or the schedule, next week will be our Spider-Man episode.
Oh, is that what we're doing next week?
Yep, and I gave you the choice, but I think you made a short about one of the comics.
I did, but it had to come down.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, TikTok, Universal just pulled any music they own from TikTok, and I was using a Universal sound.
Yeah.
So yeah, the stuff that I was specifically doing on our TikTok was often just me using popular music, and that gravy train has now ended.
Yeah. So because you did a show about it, I thought, well, that's made the decision. So we are going to be covering what I think is going to be probably one of the worst comics that we've read. What are the odds there was another Spider-Man one?
Oh, I know. I'm so excited for it, Ryan.
Yeah, it's going to be a crazy one. And if you've seen some of the shorts and some of the stuff we've talked about in previous, it's probably one of the most egregious Spider-Man plot points ever.
Radioactive cum, isn't it?
Yeah, that is one of the biggest plot points of it, yes. And we're going to see what the rest of the comic is like as well.
See what happens.
Exactly. So we're doing Spider-Man Reign. If you want to read it before the episode, by all means. If you just want to hear us complain about it for an hour, do that as well. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening. It really does make my day. You've been commenting, which we love. Please keep doing it. Comment anywhere you like. Leave us a 5-star review as long as it's really offensive to us personally and nobody else. We are here for it.
I would say this recording has elevated your mood, if anything.
Oh, I'm definitely in a better mood. 100% I'm in a better mood than when I started, but I always am. I like doing the podcast.
And thank God, because we're just going to keep chugging away no matter what happens.
Yeah, I mean, we are fucking invested in this project now.
End of the world, we'll still be here speaking into tins on a string to each other, talking about a Archie comic we found in the bin or the Beano or something.
Talking about the back of a cereal box.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening and good night.
Thank you. Goodbye.